Stop the opening. If not, people will die.
In just a few minutes, the Meridian will officially open its doors.
You're in the wrong place. The cleaning crew is upstairs.
I'm not lost. You are.
Security, take her out. All right.
But when the fourth floor fails, don't say I didn't warn you.
In the marble lobby of the tallest new tower in the city, a screen the size of a wall showed a glowing blueprint of the building, and on the fourth floor of that blueprint, a single point pulsed red. The room was full of champagne and reporters and a developer about to cut a ribbon on the proudest night of his life. None of them were looking at the screen. Why would they? It was just a pretty rendering of the building they were already standing in. A decoration, a backdrop for photographs. One man was looking at it. He stood near the back in a plain gray suit that cost less than anyone else's in the room, and he was not drinking. And he was watching that red dot the way you watch a fuse burn down towards something. Somewhere behind him, quietly, into a phone, he said 8 words. "This building is not going to open tonight." Then the lobby lights caught the red glow on the screen, and the whole beautiful blueprint seemed for a second to be bleeding. And the picture cut to black. Who was the man in the gray suit? What was the red dot? Why would the proudest building in the city not be allowed to open on its own opening night, with 300 guests already inside? The answer had walked in through the front door in a scuffed hard hat, and the man who owned the building had taken one look at her and told her the cleaning floors were upstairs. 3 hours earlier, the party was still perfect. The Meridian rose 60 stories over the river, glass and light and money. And tonight was its unveiling. Preston Hale had built it, or at least he had paid for it, which in his mind was the same thing. And he moved through his own lobby like a man walking through a portrait of himself. Cameras followed him. A local news crew was setting up for a live segment. In half an hour, he would cut a red ribbon across the main doors and open the finest address in the city to the public for the first time. There was only one small thing standing between Preston Hale and that ribbon, and he did not think about it much, because he had been told it was a formality. The building could not legally open to the public until the engineer of record signed the final safety acceptance. That was the law. A tower does not open its doors to crowds until the one licensed engineer whose name is on the structure walks it, confirms it is sound, and signs. Preston had heard this a dozen times from his lawyers, and a dozen times he had waved it off. His firm would handle it. The paperwork would appear. It always did. Tonight, in fact, the master of ceremonies had said as much from the small stage near the doors, in the smooth voice of a man reading a script. "We are just completing the final acceptance walkthrough," he had announced, "and the moment that is signed, Mr. Hale will open the Meridian to the public." A polite ripple of applause. Nobody in that room heard a warning in those words. Nobody understood that the entire glittering evening was hanging on a single signature that had not yet been given, and that the person who held that pen had not yet walked through the door. He had bought that engineering firm 2 years ago. He dealt only with its board, with men in good suits who told him what he wanted to hear. He had never once sat in a room with the person whose stamp actually made his tower legal. He had never asked. Why would a man like Preston Hale ask the name of the mechanic when he owned the whole garage? He knew the name of the firm. He had no idea what the engineer looked like, and that, though he could not have known it yet, was the single most expensive gap in Preston Hale's entire life. The revolving door turned, and a woman stepped into the lobby wearing a scuffed, high-visibility vest and a white hard hat, carrying a worn leather folder under one arm. She did not walk in like a guest. She walked in like an inspector, her eyes already moving across the ceiling, the columns, the seams in the marble, reading the room the way the rest of them read the wine list. Preston saw her before she had taken 3 steps, and he smiled the smile of a man who has just spotted something out of place. And he raised his voice just enough for the nearest cameras to catch it. "The cleaning crew works the upper floors," he said. "Service elevator is around the back. You are a little early and a little lost." A few guests chuckled, the soft, cruel chuckle of people who assume the powerful man must be right. The woman stopped. She looked at him without any expression at all. Then she looked, slowly, deliberately, at the crowd that had laughed. and something in that look made the laughter die faster than it had started. And she did not go around the back. Her name was Amara Cole, and she was 43 years old, and she had spent her life being underestimated by rooms exactly like this one. She did not raise her voice. She had learned a long time ago that raising your voice is what you do when you do not have the facts. She had the facts. She always had the facts.
I am not lost, she said. I am exactly where I am supposed to be.
A few people had turned to watch now, the way people turn when they sense a small cruelty about to become entertainment. Preston felt them turning, and it fed something in him. He gestured at her vest, her hat, her boots, at the whole wrongness of a woman dressed for a construction site, standing in a room full of evening gowns.
Sweetheart, he said, tonight is a private event. Whatever they sent you up here to wipe down, it can wait until we are done. The word sweetheart did a lot of work. It was not an accident. Preston Hale had built a whole life on the small art of putting people in their place with a single word, of handing out roles like a director who had never asked anyone to audition. Cleaning crew, sweetheart, the help. He did it so smoothly that most people never noticed they had been assigned a part until they were already playing it.
Amara turned her head and looked at the wall behind him, at a hair-lined crack running up from the base of a marble-clad column. A crack most of the room would have called decorative if they noticed it at all.
That column is C-14, she said. Load-bearing. That crack is not cosmetic. It is a shear indication, and it started at the pour, which means it has been there since before the marble went on, which means somebody covered it.
The lobby went a little quieter. She was not finished. She nodded up toward the ceiling, toward the transfer beams that carried the weight of the reception hall on the floor above. The primary transfer level is the 4th floor, she said. Every person you bring up there tonight, their weight comes down through columns like that one. So before you cut any ribbons, someone should probably ask whether those columns are carrying what the drawings say they are carrying, or what actually got poured.
Preston laughed, because laughing was what powerful men did when they did not understand something. But for just a half second, something behind his eyes flickered, because a cleaning woman does not know the phrase shear indication, and does not read column codes off a wall like a street sign, and does not talk about transfer levels as though she had drawn them herself.
A reporter near the front had stopped pretending to be interested in the canapes.
Across the room, a young architect in a navy suit had gone completely still, a glass of wine frozen halfway to his mouth, staring at Amara like a man seeing a ghost. And in the far corner, the man in the plain gray suit took out a small notebook and wrote something down. Who? A woman near the bar whispered to her husband. Is that? Nobody could answer her. Not yet. The young architect's name was Daniel Cho, and he had recognized Amara Cole the instant she said the phrase shear indication, because Amara Cole had taught it to him. 6 years ago, fresh out of school and terrified, Daniel had interned under her. She had been the best engineer he had ever worked with, and the most exacting. A woman who would send a drawing back 9 times until it was right, who used to tell him that a building does not care about your feelings, it only cares whether the math is true. He had watched her catch a load error once that 3 senior engineers had missed, an error that, if it had been built, would have brought a parking structure down on a Saturday afternoon. She had found it on a napkin in 11 minutes without raising her voice. He had learned more from her in 1 summer than in 5 years of school. It also, he remembered, once told him the thing that was echoing in his skull right now. The most dangerous person on any job site, she said, is the one who thinks a signature is just a formality. And now she was standing in the lobby of the biggest project of Daniel's career, being called a cleaning woman by the man who signed Daniel's paychecks. And Daniel Cho said nothing. He wanted to. He felt the words rising. That is Amara Cole, he wanted to say. She is one of the finest structural engineers in this country, and if she is here in a hard hat on your opening night, Mr. Hale, you should be terrified, not amused. But then he thought about his mortgage and his daughter's school, and the specific, quiet, thorough way Preston Hale destroyed the careers of people who embarrassed him. And the words died in his throat. He looked away. He would hate himself for that later. He did not yet know he would also get one more chance.
Preston, meanwhile, had recovered his footing and was steering the moment back to where he liked it, in front of the cameras, talking about himself. "Every detail of this building," he told the reporter, "came from my own vision. I do not just write the checks, I make the decisions, down to the last beam. The concrete, the steel, the glass, all of it, my call." It was a lie, and one person in the room knew exactly how big a lie it was, and she was standing 8 feet away, in a hard hat, holding a worn leather folder she had not yet opened. But it was more than a lie. It was a confession, and he did not even feel it leave his mouth. Down to the last beam, my call. On a live broadcast, in front of 100 witnesses, Preston Hale had just claimed personal ownership of every structural decision in a building that was about to be revealed as structurally fraudulent. Somewhere a detective wrote another line in a small notebook. And here and there, in ones and twos, the recognition was beginning to spread. It always does in a room full of professionals once the first person knows. An older architect near the bar leaned toward his wife and murmured that the woman in the hard hat looked familiar, that he thought he had seen her give a keynote once, years ago, on progressive collapse, though he could not be sure. A structural consultant 2 tables over went pale for reasons of his own. The whisper moved through the room the way a hairline crack moves through concrete, slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. Not the whole room knew, but enough of the right people was starting to. And every one of them was looking at Preston Hale calling this woman the cleaning crew and doing the terrible math of what it would mean if he was wrong. Only Preston himself felt nothing but pleasure. He was exactly where he loved to be, in front of a camera, in a building with his name on it, surrounded by people who laughed when he laughed. He had spent 30 years constructing a world in which he was always the most important man in any room, and tonight, he believed, was the coronation. He had built that world the same way he had built this tower. Fast, expensive, and on a foundation he had never bothered to inspect. On a side table near the doors sat a sealed manila envelope Amara had set down when she came in. Plain, unremarkable. The kind of thing a room full of people in tuxedos would never look at twice. "Remember that envelope. It is going to matter more than anyone in that lobby, including Preston Hale, could possibly imagine." Daniel took one step toward Amara, his heart hammering, ready finally to say her name out loud, and a hand landed on his shoulder. And Preston's assistant murmured in his ear that Mr. Hale needed him for the photographs now, and Daniel was pulled away before he reached her, the words still trapped behind his teeth. Amara let Preston perform. That was the thing none of them understood yet. She was not enduring the humiliation, she was allowing it. There is a difference, and it is the whole difference. A person who is enduring is waiting for it to end. A person who is allowing is waiting for something else. Amara Cole had not come to this building to win an argument in a lobby. She had come for a reason none of these people had guessed, and every minute Preston spent congratulating himself was another minute the thing she was actually waiting for came closer. She reached into a vest and took out a small, laminated card and held it up. Not high, not dramatically, just enough for the reporter's camera to catch it. It was a professional engineer's license. It carried the seal of the state board, her photograph, and a title. Structural Engineer of Record, the Meridian. For one perfect moment, the room seemed to tilt. A guest near the front actually gasped. It looked to everyone watching like the finishing blow, the twist ending. The cleaning woman revealed as the one whose name was on the building. Somewhere in the crowd, someone even started to lift their phone to film the great man's comeuppance. And then, Preston Hale did the thing that made this story worth telling. Because he did not crumble. He smiled wider. "Oh, I know exactly who you are," he said, soft enough now that only the closest cameras caught it. "You are the woman who filed that little complaint 6 months ago. The one who thought she could tell me how to build my own tower." So he did know her name. He had known it the whole time, which meant the cleaning woman remark had not been a mistake. It had been a choice. He had looked at the one person who could stop his tower from opening and decided to call her the help. On camera, for sport. He leaned in, and his voice dropped even lower. "Let me save you some embarrassment, since you clearly did not get the news," he said. "That complaint of yours died months ago. It never even made it to a hearing.
I have people who make sure things like that quietly disappear, and they are very good at their jobs. So whatever you think that card gives you, whatever you came here to do tonight, it is already over. You just do not know it yet. Put the card away and go home." That was the moment the room turned back to Preston's side, because he sounded so certain. He was not bluffing. He genuinely believed the complaint was dead, because he had paid a man to kill it, and that man had told him it was done. Amara's face did not change, but her phone, silenced in her vest pocket, buzzed once against her chest. A single pulse. She did not reach for it. She simply looked at Preston Hale the way an engineer looks at a load she already knows is going to fail, with something that was almost, but not quite, pity. Behind Preston, unnoticed, the man in the grey suit lifted his phone to his ear and turned slightly away. And Preston, riding high, did not register that the stranger in the corner had been watching him, and only him, for the last 20 minutes. He also did not notice that the stranger, for one brief second, looked directly at Amara, and that Amara looked back, and that something passed between them that was not the look of two strangers at all. Preston raised a hand instead, and, without breaking his smile, signaled to two security guards near the door. The guards started across the room, and something ugly settled over the party. The particular discomfort of watching power decide to remove someone. A few guests looked away. A few leaned in, hungry for it. This was the part where the strange woman in the vest would be escorted out, and the beautiful evening would be put back on its rails, and everyone could pretend the small unpleasantness had never happened. Amara watched the guards come, and did not move, and did not reach for her phone, and did not open the folder under her arm. She simply waited, with the patience of a person who has already read the ending, while a man who thought he owned the building sent 2 men in blazers to remove the one person legally required to open it. 30 minutes, called the event coordinator, moving through the crowd. 30 minutes to the ribbon. The words landed on the party like a starter pistol. Waiters moved faster. The news crew checked their light. Preston straightened his jacket for the cameras, because in 30 minutes he would cut that ribbon, and this whole small unpleasantness with the woman in the hard hat would be nothing but a story he told at dinner parties. 30 minutes. Hold that number in your mind, because from here on, everything in this building is running against a clock, and only one person in the room understands what happens when it reaches 0. He decided to enjoy the last of it first. He walked Amara toward the live camera on purpose, one hand hovering near her elbow without touching, presenting her to the reporter like an exhibit. "This is what I deal with," he said, warm, amused, playing to the lens. "You build something magnificent, and people come out of the woodwork to attach themselves to it. Everyone thinks they built the building. The truth is, a project like this has one visionary, and 1,000 people who would like to take the credit." He was so pleased with himself. He had no idea he was standing next to the visionary, and that she was letting him talk. The reporter, sensing tension but not understanding it, turned the microphone toward Amara and asked brightly whether she had a comment. Amara looked into the camera. She was calm, the way still water is calm, the way the surface of a river is calm right before the ground beneath it gives way. "Yes," she said. "You should postpone the ribbon cutting." That was all. No explanation. No threat. 4 words. "You should postpone the ribbon cutting." The reporter blinked and waited for more, and there was no more. Preston laughed and pulled the camera back toward himself, calling it stage fright, calling her a disgruntled contractor, filling the silence with noise. But the 4 words sat there in the air, and they did not dissolve. A few people in the room felt the temperature change and could not have told you why. And near the wall, a junior engineer from Preston's own firm, a young man who had signed nothing but had seen the raw concrete test reports months ago and had been told firmly to forget them, suddenly found something very interesting to look at on the floor and would not lift his eyes to meet Amara's, because he knew. He was not the only one in that room who knew. He was only the one closest to the exit. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a room when some of the people in it have information the rest do not, and it is a quiet that spreads. One person looks nervous, and the person next to them wonders why, and starts looking nervous too, and none of them can say what is wrong. Only that the confident man at the center of the room is the only one who does not seem to feel it.
Preston felt nothing. Preston was already thinking about the after-party. What did she know that made a woman being publicly humiliated sound so completely, so eerily unbothered? What could a person possibly be holding that let them stand in a hostile room on live television and calmly tell a billionaire to stop his own celebration and then say nothing more? The answer was sitting in a plain envelope on a side table 15 feet away. But it was not time for the envelope yet. There were still 2 humiliations to go, and to walk out the door before Amara Cole would reach for it.
"Enough," Preston said, quietly now, the performance over. The 2 security guards were beside Amara. Preston did not even look at her as he gave the order. He was already turning back to his guests, already reaching for a fresh glass of champagne.
"Show her out," he said. "She is not on the list." What happened next was the part everyone in that room would remember wrong.
Daniel Cho was close enough to speak, and the words were right there, and everyone who was ever going to think of him as a coward was about to be proven right or wrong in the next 2 seconds. He opened his mouth. He got as far as the first syllable of her name. Then he saw Preston watching him sideways, one eyebrow raised, a silent question that every employee understands, the question that means, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And Daniel thought of everything he would lose. And the name came out as nothing but a breath that no one heard. He looked down at his own shoes, burning with the shame he would carry out of that building. Some part of him swore, in that moment, that if he ever got one more chance, he would not waste it. He did not believe he would get one. People like him rarely did.
Meanwhile, Amara's phone buzzed again. And again. Not once now. A fast, repeating pattern. The pattern of a system, not a person. The pattern of an alarm that has stopped asking politely. And for the first time all night, something crossed her face. A flicker, quickly controlled, that was not calm. It was concern. Real, specific concern. The concern of someone who has just read a number they did not want to see. She glanced just once up toward the ceiling, toward the 4th floor, toward the transfer level where 300 people were slowly gathering for a ribbon. The man in the gray suit saw the flicker too, and he saw where she looked, and he stood up straighter and began, without hurry, to move toward the front of the room. A guard reached for Amara's arm, and Amara Cole did the last thing any of them expected. She did not pull away. She did not argue. She did not play the card again or demand a lawyer or make a scene for the cameras that were begging for one. She picked up her worn leather folder, left the sealed manila envelope sitting on the side table exactly where it was, and walked toward the doors on her own, ahead of the guards, her back straight, as if leaving had been her idea all along. Because it had been. They escorted her out through the grand lobby, past the champagne and the cameras, and the reporters got their shot. The striking image of the woman in the hard hat being walked out of the glittering party. To everyone watching, this was the end. The developer had won. The strange woman in the vest had made her scene and been removed, and now the celebration could go on. If you had stopped the video right here, you would have called it a story about a powerful man crushing someone small. You would have been exactly as wrong as Preston Hale. What none of them noticed, because they were all watching Preston smile, was the wall she passed on her way to the door. Set into the marble, beside the main elevators, was a bronze dedication plaque. The kind every important building has, listing the architect, the developer, the contractor, and one more line, at the bottom, in smaller letters. Structural Engineer of Record. The name on that line was too small to read from across the room, and the cameras never caught it. And Preston Hale walked past it every single day of construction and had never once looked at whose name was carved into his own lobby wall. It is a strange thing about powerful men. They will put their own name in letters 2 feet tall on the outside of a building and never once read the small print that actually holds it up. Amara looked at the plaque as she passed. Just a glance, the way you glance at your own name. Preston, buoyant, could not resist one last performance. He called after her, loud enough for the live feed, and he chose his cruelty carefully because he wanted the laugh. "And I meant what I said about the upper floors," he added. "If you really want to be useful tonight, there is plenty up there that could use a good cleaning." The room laughed with him. Then he turned back to the reporter and, feeling untouchable, said the second thing, the fatal thing,
The thing he would have swallowed his own tongue to take back if he had known who was standing in the shadows near the door. "Do not worry about any of that inspection nonsense," he said, waving a hand. "I have people at the city who handle the paperwork. Sign-offs, permits, safety certificates. That is what money is for. You pay the right person once, and the boxes get checked, and you never have to think about it again."
He laughed. The reporter laughed. "A city official who handles the paperwork. You pay the right person. On a live broadcast." Somewhere in the crowd, the man in the gray suit closed his notebook. But that little complaint Preston was so sure had died had not, in fact, died. 6 months ago, Amara Cole had walked into a city office and filed a formal report that the concrete on the transfer floors of the Meridian did not meet the specification she had designed to, and that the developer had directed the reduction and concealed it. Preston had paid a man named Frank Dolan to make that report disappear, and it had disappeared from Dolan's desk. But it had not disappeared from the desk of the honest inspector who found it later. Amara had done everything right, 6 months early, through the front door, in writing. That was not weakness. That was a foundation being poured, quietly, under a man who thought he was standing on solid ground. She could have gone to the press months ago. She had the name in her field to do it, and one dramatic interview would have burned Preston Hale down in a week. She had not, and her reason was the whole shape of who she was. The press could be spun and sued and drowned in a rich man's lawyers. A signed safety refusal, backed by data and a criminal case, could not. She never wanted the argument. She wanted the record. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind Amara Cole, and on the other side of them, alone on the sidewalk, with the whole cruel evening behind her, Amara Cole did something no one inside that building would have believed if you told them. She smiled, and she took out her phone. Inside the building, at that same moment, a second thing was quietly beginning to move, because Daniel Cho had reached his breaking point. He had watched her walk out. He had said nothing again, and the shame of it had finally grown heavier than his fear. He slipped away from the photographers, found a quiet corner behind a pillar, took out his own phone and opened his email, and began to scroll back, months back, through the project correspondence he had been copied on and had tried very hard to forget. He was looking for one specific message. He remembered it existed. He remembered the sick feeling he had gotten the day it landed in his inbox, the day he had read it twice and then closed his laptop and told himself it was not his problem, not his signature, not his call. Two people now, on two sides of a glass wall, were reaching for the same truth from opposite directions. One had spent 6 months building the case in the light. The other was about to find, in his own pocket, the single piece that would make it undeniable. Outside, Amara read her screen and lifted the phone to her ear and spoke a few short words to someone whose voice was very calm, and hung up and turned around. She looked back through the glass at the party that had just thrown her out, at the 300 people gathering upstairs, at the man reaching for his ribbon, and Amara Cole walked back toward the doors of the building she had just been removed from. Because whatever was on that screen had changed the math. And when the math changes, Amara Cole does not stand on a sidewalk. The screen showed a dashboard. It was not a spy device, and it was not a secret. It was a structural health monitoring system, the ordinary, boring, legally required kind that lives inside every modern high-rise. A web of sensors, reading load and strain and movement in real time. And Amara had access to it for the simplest reason in the world. She was the engineer of record. It was her job. It was, in fact, the whole reason she had come tonight, to do the final structural walkthrough that the building could not legally open without. The dashboard was lit up in one place, the 4th floor. A low floor, structurally the floor that carried the crowd from the lobby up toward the grand reception hall. The transfer floor. The one she had pointed at an hour ago, when nobody was listening. The sensors on the 4th floor were reading a load climbing toward a red line, and climbing. Because upstairs, right now, 300 guests and reporters and a developer were gathering closer and closer together for a ribbon cutting. All of their weight pressing down through columns that Amara knew, because the reports,
had been poured with concrete 2 grades below the specification she had designed to.
That was the red dot from the very beginning of this story. That pulsing point on the wall screen in the cold open, the one the stranger in the gray suit had been watching all night, the one Amara had been feeling buzz against her chest every time it climbed. It was not a metaphor. It was a floor, filling up with people, over concrete that could not carry them. The phone calls had not been a lawyer, and they had not been an accomplice, and they had not been some secret device she had planted to catch a villain. They had been the building itself, the ordinary monitoring system doing exactly what it was designed to do, telling the one person legally responsible for the structure that her structure was in trouble.
She put the phone to her ear now, and a calm procedural voice answered, and she said,
"It is moving faster than we modeled. The crowd is consolidating on the transfer floor. You need to move now." And the voice on the other end said, "Understood. We are already inside. Hold your position."
Hold your position. For 1 second, standing on that sidewalk, the calm she had worn all night slipped, and something underneath it showed, and it was fear. Not for herself. She kept seeing the number climb, and the 300 people pressed together over columns she had begged them not to trust, and she thought, with a clarity that frightened her, that all her patience and all her records would mean nothing if the floor went before the police reached it. 6 months of doing everything right, and it might still come down to seconds. Her hand, for just a moment, was not steady. Then she pushed it back down, because a shaking hand does not save anyone. She turned around and walked back toward the doors of the building she had just been thrown out of, straight into the countdown. She badged herself back through a side entrance with a credential the guards had not thought to check. The credential of the engineer of record, the one person in the world who could not legally be kept out of that building. And she moved through the crowd toward the front of the room where a man was lifting a pair of golden scissors. And every step she took, the number on her phone climbed. Upstairs on the 4th floor, the crowd was doing exactly the wrong thing. As the ribbon moment approached, people were not spreading out. They were pressing in, toward the doors, toward the stage, toward the shot, all of them wanting to be near the great man at the great moment. 300 bodies migrating into the same corner of the same compromised floor. And the sensors were feeling every one of them.
A number that had been amber all night ticked quietly into red.
And then, for the first time, the danger stopped being a number on a phone and became something a person could feel. On the 4th floor, somewhere above the champagne and the speeches, there was a sound. Small. A single dry creak, the kind old houses make, except this building was not old. This building was 3 days from its grand opening, and buildings that new are not supposed to make any sound at all. A fine trickle of pale dust sifted down from the base of a column and settled on the shoulder of a man in a tuxedo, who brushed it off without looking. A crystal pendant on the nearest chandelier began very slightly to tremble, throwing a thin, nervous shimmer of light across the ceiling.
A woman near the column felt something through the soles of her shoes, a faint wrongness, the vibration of a floor working harder than a floor should, and she stopped mid-sentence and looked down, and then looked at her husband, and neither of them could have said what was wrong, only that some animal part of them had just decided it did not want to be standing exactly here.
Nothing fell. Nothing cracked open. The building did not fail, but the room had felt it now, that first cold breath of something gone wrong, and the party's easy noise thinned into a nervous murmur, and Amara Cole, moving through the crowd toward the front, felt the tremor come up through her own feet and knew, to the pound, exactly how little time was left. Somewhere in that crowd, the young junior engineer who had been avoiding Amara's eyes felt it in his gut without any dashboard at all, felt the specific wrongness a person feels when they are standing somewhere they know they should not be, and he began, very casually, to drift toward the stairs. A few people noticed him go. One of them wondered why. How long does a lie hold up under real weight? Preston Hale was about to find out, on live television, with the exact answer measured in pounds per square inch, and the only person in the building who could read that answer was walking straight toward him with a folder under her arm. Inside, the ribbon was in Preston's hands. The cameras were live. The coordinator was counting down from 10, and the crowd on the transfer floor was pressing in tight for the shot. All of them wanting to be in frame when the great man opened his tower. 10, 9, 8, and the man in the gray suit stepped out of the corner and into the center of the room and held up a badge, and the countdown stopped. "Detective Marcus Reyes," he said, and he did not shout. And that was somehow worse than shouting. He did not have to shout. That was the whole point. "Financial and Structural Fraud Unit. Mr. Hale, I am going to need you to stop this ceremony. And I am going to need everyone on the 4th floor to begin moving back down toward the ground floor, calmly, in an orderly way, starting now."
For a moment, Preston just stared at him. Ribbon in one hand, golden scissors in the other, the frozen smile still on his face. The room held its breath. This was the twist, surely, the moment it all came down.
And then Preston's smile came back online, wider, smoother, the practiced smile of a man who had bought his way out of worse than this. "Detective," he said, "there has clearly been some kind of mistake, and I am sure we can clear it up without ruining everyone's evening."
He turned to his guests, spreading his hands, performing calm, radiating it. "If this is about the concrete on the lower floors, let me put everyone's mind at ease right now. That was a subcontractor error, fully documented, corrected. And more to the point, it was inspected and certified to code by a licensed city inspector months ago. I have the paperwork. I have his signature. So whatever anyone has told you, detective, my building is safe, and it is legal. And this ceremony is going to continue."
He said it with total radiant confidence because he believed every word, because Frank Dolan had taken his money and stamped the reports and looked him in the eye and told him it was handled. And the terrible thing was, it worked. You could feel the room tilt back toward him. He had an answer. He had paperwork. He had a signature from the city itself. The guests who had begun to edge toward the exits slowed and turned and started to believe once again that Preston Hale had everything under control, because Preston Hale always sounded like he had everything under control. The detective had a badge, but the developer had a certificate, and a certificate feels like proof. If the story had ended there, Preston Hale would have walked out of that building a free man, and 300 people would have gone back to standing on a floor that could not hold them. And then a young architect in a navy suit walked out of the crowd. For Daniel Cho, the walk from the back of that room to the center of it was the longest journey of his life. It was maybe 40 feet. It took him 30 years. Every step was a thing he was giving up. The job, the reference, the comfortable future in which he kept his head down and his mouth shut, and told himself that the concrete was somebody else's signature. He thought about Amara, who had taught him that a building does not care about your feelings, only whether the math is true. And he understood, finally, standing in that crowd, that a life works the same way. You can feel however you want about the truth. The truth does not care. It is either load-bearing or it is not. His hands were shaking so badly, he had to hold his phone with both of them. His face was the color of paper. He had spent his whole career being careful, being quiet, being the kind of man who looked at his shoes at the important moments. And he walked straight up to Detective Marcus Reyes, past his own boss, into the glare of the live cameras. And he did the bravest thing he had ever done. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice cracked on the first word. And then, somehow, it steadied. "His name is Daniel Cho. He is an architect on this project. I think you need to see this. It is an email from Mr. Hale, sent to the concrete subcontractor 8 months ago. In it, he personally instructs them to reduce the concrete grade on the transfer floors to cut costs, and he tells them, in writing, to keep the change off the official reports. He signed it himself. I have had it in my inbox for 8 months, and I should have sent it to someone the day I got it, and I am sorry I did not, and I am sending it now." The room went utterly silent. Somewhere, a champagne glass slipped from a hand and shattered on the marble. And nobody even looked. Preston Hale's smile did not fall. It hardened, turned to something cold and reptilian, the mask finally showing the shape of the face underneath. He turned, slowly, away from the detective, away from Daniel,
and he looked across the room to the doors, where Amara Cole had just walked back in, calm, unhurried, her worn leather folder under her arm, and in a low, flat, murderous voice that the live microphones still caught perfectly, Preston Hale said, "You cannot prove anything." Amara did not raise her voice. She never had, all night, and she did not start now. She walked to the side table, picked up the sealed manila envelope she had left there almost 30 minutes ago, the one plain, unremarkable thing in a room full of gold, and she broke the seal. "Remember the envelope. This is what it was for." She did not hand it to the detective with a flourish. She took the pages out one at a time and laid them on the table, face up, and she narrated them in the same flat, factual voice she had used to read the crack off the column, the voice of a woman reading numbers off a wall. "This," she said, laying down the first page, "is my formal refusal to sign the final safety acceptance for this building. It is dated 6 months ago. I refused because Mr. Hale directed that the concrete grade on the primary transfer floors be reduced below the specification I designed to, and then refused to correct it." She looked up once at the crowd. Refusing to sign is the only real power an engineer of record has. It is not dramatic. It is a signature that does not happen. But it means that this building, legally, cannot open to the public. It has never been able to open. Everything you are standing in tonight is a party inside a building that was never cleared for a single member of the public to enter. You could hear people breathing. She laid down the next page. "This is the structural monitoring data from tonight, from the building's own sensors. As of 6 minutes ago, the 4th floor, the floor most of you were just standing on, was carrying a live load approaching the failure threshold for the concrete that was actually poured. Not the concrete on the drawings, the concrete in the columns. That is why I told a reporter an hour ago that Mr. Hale should postpone. That is why the detective just asked you all to come downstairs. It was not a legal technicality. You were the weight." On the 4th floor, unseen by the crowd downstairs, officers were already moving people toward the stairs, gently, steadily, thinning out the load one body at a time. And on Amara's phone, the number that had climbed into red all night had finally, slowly, begun to fall. She noticed it. Of course she noticed it. It was the only thing in that room she had ever truly been watching. Nobody laughed now. Nobody was thinking about the woman in the hard hat as the help. She laid down the last pages. "And this," she said, "is the payment trail. Mr. Hale did not certify this building to code. He purchased a certification from a city inspector named Frank Dolan, and these are the records of it." Then she did the thing that ended the last shred of doubt in the room. Preston opened his mouth to say again that she could not prove any of it, that the code was complicated, that she was misreading it. And before he got a word out, Amara recited from memory, without looking at a single page, the exact section and subsection of the structural safety code that his concrete violated, word for word, clause and threshold and tolerance. "Because," she said quietly, "I know that standard by heart. I did not memorize it for tonight. I know it by heart because I am one of the engineers who wrote it. It is my language. It is my name in the code, and my name on this building. And it has been my name the whole time you were telling me to go clean the upstairs floors." Every head in that room turned, at last, toward the bronze plaque on the wall by the elevators, and this time the cameras found it and zoomed, and the whole city watching at home read the small line at the bottom that Preston Hale had walked past every day for 2 years and never once bothered to read. "Structural engineer of record, Amara Cole." The reaction moved through the room in a chain, one face at a time. Preston Hale went gray, the color draining out of him as he finally read the name he had walked past for 2 years. Daniel Cho let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 6 years, and, for the first time all night, stood up straight. A ripple went through the crowd. 300 heads turning from the plaque to the woman in the hard hat and back again. The reporter, who had asked her for a comment an hour ago as a joke, wheeled her camera toward Amara with both hands. Detective Reyes allowed himself the smallest nod, and Amara Cole simply stood there, calm as still water, and let all of it wash past her, because she had known who she was the whole time. She was the only one in the room who had not needed to be told. For a moment, nobody in that lobby moved.
300 people stood in the wreckage of a story they had all believed an hour ago. The woman they had watched get called the cleaning crew. The woman they had laughed at. The woman they had watched be walked out the door. She had not been the least important person in the room. She had been the only one who mattered, standing among them the whole evening, letting them believe otherwise, because she had somewhere more important to be than right in the moment. She had needed to be right at the end. A few people, to their credit, looked ashamed. A few looked at Preston, and more than a few looked at the plaque and then at Amara, and understood that they had just watched something they would be telling people about for the rest of their lives, and that they had been, briefly, on the wrong side of it. That was the answer to the question the entire evening had been asking. Who was this woman, and why was she so calm? As though she had known how the night would end before it began. Because she had. She was the one whose signature the tower needed to open. She was the one who had filed the case 6 months ago and waited. She was not a guest at Preston Hale's triumph. She was the foundation he had been standing on the whole time. And she had simply chosen the moment to stop holding him up. And then Detective Marcus Reyes, watching Preston Hale's face, finally delivered the sentence that took the floor out from under him for good. "Frank Dolan was arrested 3 weeks ago, Mr. Hale," he said, in the same calm, procedural voice he had used all night. "He has been cooperating with our office ever since. Every payment, every report, every conversation. Your umbrella has been talking about you for 21 days. He reached into his jacket. "So when you say we cannot prove anything, I want you to understand something. We're not here to start an investigation." He drew out a folded warrant. "We're here to finish one." Preston Hale did not go quietly. Men like him never do. The mask came all the way off now, and the charm underneath it turned out to be nothing but teeth. "Forgery," he said, loud, turning to the room, to the cameras, to anyone who might still be his. "That email is a forgery. That woman has a grudge. She has spent 6 months trying to destroy me, and that document she is waving around is fabricated." He jabbed a finger at the pages on the table. "Do you people have any idea how easy it is to fake a paper trail?" He was good at this. He had been talking his way out of rooms his entire life, and for a moment the crowd wavered again. Because doubt is a seed, and Preston Hale knew exactly how to plant it. "I want my attorney," he snapped. "Nobody says another word. This is defamation, this is a stunt, and every camera in this room is going to be named in the lawsuit." He rounded on Amara. "You are lying. You cannot prove I wrote a single word of it." And Detective Reyes, who had not raised his voice once all night, answered each thing in the flat, unhurried tone of a man reading items off a list. "The email is not a forgery," he said. "We pulled it from the subcontractor's server 3 weeks ago, under warrant, with the headers intact. The document is not fabricated. It is a filed municipal safety report, timestamped 6 months ago, in an office you do not own. And you did write it, Mr. Hale, because we do not only have her copy, we have Frank Dolan's copy. We have Frank Dolan's statement. And we have the recording Frank Dolan made of the conversation, where you told him exactly what you needed to disappear. Your attorney is welcome to meet us downtown, but no attorney alive can make 21 days of a cooperating witness unhappen." Preston opened his mouth one more time, and nothing came out, because he had finally arrived at the one place a lifetime of money had never taken him, the place where there was nothing left to buy, and no one left to blame, and no version of the story that did not end exactly here. It did not happen the way it happens in movies. There was no swarm of officers, no shouting, no doors kicked in, no line of squad cars with their lights spinning across the glass. That is not how a real case ends, and the ordinariness of it was somehow the most powerful part. It was just Detective Reyes, quietly, unfolding the warrant and reading it aloud in a level voice. Because a real case ends with paper, not with noise. Preston Hale was placed under arrest on charges of fraud, bribery of a public official, and reckless endangerment. The last one for filling a structurally compromised building with 300 people on a floor he had been formally warned, in writing, 6 months earlier, could not carry them. An officer stepped forward and, almost gently, took the golden scissors out of Preston's hand and set them on the table.
because you cannot cut a ribbon in handcuffs.
While one officer led Preston toward the doors, Reyes was already on the phone, and within the hour, a second official arrived, an inspector named Elena Ruiz. She was the honest one, the one who had found Amara's buried complaint on Dolan's old desk, and instead of burying it again, had opened it and read it and started asking the questions that had brought everyone to this night. Ruiz walked the fourth floor with Amara, read the same monitoring data off the same dashboard, and then did the only thing left to do. She sealed the building. The evacuation was quiet and orderly, and a little unreal. 300 people in evening wear filed down the emergency stairs of a building they had come to celebrate, past officers who spoke in low, even voices, out onto the sidewalk, where, an hour earlier, a woman in a hard hat had stood alone. Some of them were on their phones before they reached the ground floor. By the time they were on the street, it was already national. The clip of the developer calling the engineer of record the cleaning crew, and then being arrested in front of her 30 minutes later, was the kind of thing the internet does not let go of. It had 4 million views before the last guest reached the sidewalk. By morning, it would have many times that. The grand opening of the Meridian was canceled. The doors that Preston Hale had wanted so badly to throw open to the public were instead closed by the city itself, indefinitely, till the tower he had cut corners on could be torn back into and made as safe as the woman in the hard hat had demanded it be, half a year before, when nobody in power would listen.
Preston lost the tower. He lost the reputation he had spent 30 years building, gone in a single live broadcast that the whole city had watched. The board of his own company, the men in good suits who had told him what he wanted to hear, were already, that same night, drafting the statement that would put the entire disaster on him alone. And he lost his freedom. Not because a hero swept in to save the day at the last second, but because a quiet woman had done her job, kept her records, told the truth to the right office 6 months early, and then simply waited for the enormous weight of a lie to find its own failure point. Gravity did the rest. Gravity always does.
The reporters who had filmed her being walked out, who had gotten their striking shot of the humiliated cleaning woman, now swung their cameras back toward her, hungry for the new story, the real one. And Daniel Cho, who had found his courage one crucial hour too late, and then, in the end, exactly in time, was standing near her, no longer looking at his shoes. Detective Reyes made a point of saying, on the record, in front of those cameras, that Mr. Cho's email had been material evidence, and that his coming forward tonight had taken a kind of nerve most people never find. It was the first time in his career Daniel had ever heard his own name spoken like that. It would not be the last. As the officers walked Preston Hale past Amara toward the doors, deflated, grey, the smooth confidence finally scrubbed off his face, he stopped. He really looked at her, perhaps for the first time all night, and he asked the only kind of question a man like him knows how to ask. "What do you want?" he said. "Money, a settlement, a statement for the cameras, name it. What is it that you actually want?" Because in Preston Hale's world, everyone wanted something, and everything had a price. And if he could just find hers, then even now, even in handcuffs, he could tell himself he understood the transaction. He was about to learn that he had never understood the transaction at all. Amara Cole did not answer him with money, and she did not answer him with triumph, because triumph was never what any of this had been about. She had not filed a complaint 6 months ago to win a scene in a lobby. She had filed it because a building was not safe, and people were going to walk into it. And she was the one whose name was on the line that said it was. She reached down and picked up the white hard hat she had set on the table, and she put it back on, adjusting the strap the way a person does 1,000 times without thinking. A small, ordinary motion that somehow silenced the entire room.
"I'm going upstairs," she said, "to check the structure. The way I came here to do 3 hours ago, before you decided I was the help."
She paused, and she looked back at him, not with anger, not with anything you could call satisfaction, just with the plain steadiness of a person who has finally been seen for exactly what she always was, and who did not need the seeing to know it.
"You told me to go clean the upper floors," she said. "So that is where I am going, up,
to make sure the thing you built does not come down on anyone before the city can take it apart and put it back together right. She turned toward the elevators. As she crossed the lobby, Daniel Cho stepped into her path. He did not have a speech ready. All the words he had failed to say all night, all the years since that summer she had taught him, came down in the end to only two of them. "I'm sorry," he said. Amara stopped. She looked at the young man who had frozen when it mattered, and then, at the very last moment, had walked into the fire anyway. She did not tell him it was all right, because it had not been. She did not lecture him, because he had been lecturing himself for 8 months, and would go on doing it far longer than she ever could. She just nodded. Once. It was the only absolution she had to give, and from her, it was enough. Daniel's eyes filled, and he nodded back, and that was the whole conversation. And it said more than anything either of them had managed to say out loud all night. Behind her, Preston Hale was led out into the night, past the plaque with her name on it, past the cameras, out of the building that had, for one evening, belonged to him, and would never belong to him again. The elevator doors opened, and Amara Cole stepped inside, alone, and rode up into the tower that carried her name, to finish the work, because the building still had to be checked, floor by floor, and she was still the only person in that entire glittering room with the license, the knowledge, and the will to do it. Not because anyone was watching. The cameras stayed downstairs. She did it because it was hers to do, and that had always been the only reason she needed. The building had asked her a question all night, the same question it asks every engineer whose name goes on it, which is simply whether it is safe. And she had never once been willing to lie about the answer, not to a billionaire, not to a camera, not to herself. The doors slid shut. There is a kind of power that fills a room, that cuts ribbons and calls the cameras and hands out roles to other people, that tells the woman in the hard hat where she belongs. It is loud and it is certain, and it holds up about as well as concrete poured 2 grades too thin. And there is the other kind, the quiet kind, that reads the crack no one else can see, and signs its name, or refuses to, in the small print at the bottom of the wall where nobody ever bothers to look. Preston Hale spent his whole life certain he was the first kind, and that the second was something you paid other people to handle. He never once understood that his entire tower, every floor of it, every soul in it, had been standing the whole time on the second. He learned it, in the end, on the night it cost him everything, from a woman he had told to go clean the upstairs.